good morning, buenos días, dobre rano. I have the feeling in this conference that the question is to build or not to build. Our second keynote speaker, I'm going to introduce him. I've just met him, so I cannot tell many things, but I'm going to read some cool things that he does. He's Dr. Van der Rie. He's a National Technical Executive in Ecology at WSP Australia and an adjunct associate professor at the University of Melbourne's School. Just tell me if I say something wrong. Of biosciences, he's an international recognized ecologist consulting all over the globe. Mr. Rodney is also the chair of the Australasian Network of Ecology and Transportation. It's a member of the Scientific and Expert Committee of the IENE and was a specialist for the Biodiversity and Infrastructure Synergy Project BISOM. Okay. When when he's not busy saving the world, he also writes books like the award-winning Handbook of Road Ecology, and I heard he likes comedy, so please ask him for the jokes. Please, Dr. Rodney, enlighten us. Can we trust technology?
No. Just for the record, I uploaded my presentation last night. It got here about 2 minutes to 9, and there was no presentation on the computer, so don't trust technology. And also, I apologise up front, because if you read the publicity information that was out there a couple of weeks ago, Edgar van der Grift was supposed to be giving his presentation, but he couldn't make it at the last minute, so I'm filling in for him. They're big shoes and big clothes to fill, but I will do my best. So my presentation today is really about, I guess, where has road ecology or transport ecology come from, where are we at the moment, and where do we need to go? I need to do that in about 30 minutes, so I'm going to be very quick in some areas, I'm going to completely miss other areas, but what I really want to focus on is where the future, I think, an important area that we need to think about in the future, but we're not doing it, I think, to the extent that we should be. The context is there's 64 million kilometres of roads on the planet, enough to get to the moon and back 83 times, 7 million kilometres of railways, and unless, as Gaia mentioned last night, there's a big change in the next few years, we're going to see another 25 million lane kilometres of roads coming, 90% of that will be in developing countries. The number of cars on the roads are going to triple. Most of those will also be in developing countries. Some statistics that I just can't even get my head around. About 70% of all infrastructure that will be on Earth in 2050 hasn't been built yet. And there's some major global initiatives happening where there's lots and lots of focus on building various kinds of infrastructure. But first of all, I think it's kind of timely. The very first published paper on roadkill, almost to the month, happened 100 years ago. So old, and I reckon this is a great name, Dayton Stoner. I reckon if I had a name, I'd like to be a stoner. Anyway, moving on. Bad joke. One, okay. So he travelled across the US and with his wife on a road trip, and they counted roadkill. Since then, there's been hundreds of books, best practice manuals, special issues in journals, hundreds, probably thousands of conferences, seminars, workshops, etc., etc. And gazillions of dollars has been spent on a whole range of different kinds of avoidance, minimisation, mitigation, and sort of offsetting and compensation. So we've come a long way in that time. And when I talk about roads or whatever it might be, it's really linear transport infrastructure, and that includes railway, obviously, but there's power line, easements, transmission lines. That's really important as we transition to renewable. Certainly in Australia, we're building, I think, 10,000 kilometres of new transmission lines over the next 10 years. There's pipelines, canals and waterways, ski runs, if you like, bike paths, walking trails, and of course, fences. Perhaps one of the first things to note is that if we compare road ecology and railway ecology, road ecology is by far and away the most well-represented or well-studied in the scientific literature. So this was some work that Pop and Boyle did back in 2017. Might have changed a little bit. It's pretty much the same. In the top ecology and conservation journals, so we just look at biological conservation. The first column there's about 56 papers on road and 4 papers on railways. So given the shift to better or less carbon intensive transport, we do need to think about upping our game when it comes to railway ecology. This won't be new to any of you. There's a whole range of impacts of transport on biodiversity and on the ecology, ranging from mortality, there's habitat loss, there's barrier effects, avoidance, and corridors, movement up and down the corridors. And so we've been quite busy, I would say, in the last sort of 20 odd years, and we've really got our heads around what it means to try and restore connectivity. And so I like this one. This wasn't one that Edgar asked me to put in, but it is from the Netherlands, and it's the largest overpass or land bridge that we could find. It crosses a canal, a railway, and a motorway. So it's about as big as it gets. Then, of course, there's a whole range of other, large bridges for animals to go underneath, all sorts of culverts, and smaller vegetated land bridges. And just point out there that, if you stick around long enough, you will go from a not so fat and hairy person to something that's a little more rotund and a little shinier on the top. So be careful. Get out while you can, I think is the message. We also have installed hundreds of glider poles now and canopy bridges right around the world. So this was one of the first things I started on about 20 odd years ago, and it's pleasing to see them being installed around the world. And the good news is there's millions, if not gazillions again, that big number, of photos or tracks or evidence of a whole range of different species using these underpasses and overpasses. Things on these canopy bridges, glider poles, a whole range of things. But we've made some monumental stuff-ups along the way. This box culvert is not for fish. That's for terrestrial animals. The drainage culverts, the round pipes, are for drainage. Someone got it a little bit wrong. So I'm hoping we've learned things along the way, and mistakes like this are becoming less and less common. And I would say that wildlife crossing structures are almost business as usual. If we want to build a road or a railway, I would say in most countries, there's an expectation that you're probably going to need some crossing structures. And I guess in some ways, the planners and the engineers perhaps, and maybe even us as consultants, we're thinking, all right, if we just build some crossing structures, she'll be fantastic. No problems at all. We can build this road or railway wherever we want. And I don't know, I was in academia for 15 or 20 years and now in private consulting, and the question I often get asked is, do we really need that many crossing structures? Do we need all of those in all those different locations? Why can't the animals just use the drainage structures? We're building 150 culverts. Surely that's enough for these animals. And I suppose the other point here is that we know for a lot of different species what kind of crossing structures they require. But there's many that we still don't know enough. I'm working on a project at the moment where there's reptiles that live in cracking clays in the soil. I don't know how to get them under this piece of infrastructure. Once we run the machinery up and down the track and we dig it up, how do we restore the cracking clays so the reptiles can actually get to the edge of the infrastructure and then cross underneath and out the other side? So if there's any experts in cracking clay reptiles, I'd love to chat. There's also many regions that are underrepresented in the work that we do. The tropics, parts of Asia and Africa and parts of South America. There's still a lot of work that we need to do in those places. And the question is, how well do these crossing structures restore or improve rates of movement? And unfortunately, the answer, which will be at 11:20 today, if you're interested, at another presentation, is we actually don't know. Most of the monitoring that we do is not set up to answer, does this crossing structure or this suite of crossing structures actually mitigate, as in remove the barrier effect of this road for these particular species. We know that animals use them. We know that crossing structures are better than no crossing structures. And I think what it reflects, and I'm getting into my presentation at 11:20, what I'm trying to say is I think we need to do better, well-designed studies that actually aim to evaluate how well these crossing structures work. Because if we think they work and they don't, then we're not actually meeting our conditions of approval and we're shortchanging, if you like, the environment. The good news, though, is that fencing, and we've got good empirical data on this, is that fencing is the most effective way to reduce or prevent wildlife vehicle collisions. So I think it was around about 80% reduction in mortality if you build fences and crossing structures together, and that's been demonstrated empirically in the literature. Unfortunately though, wildlife vehicle collisions are still a major global challenge. Some of these statistics are a little bit old, but nevertheless, to be frank, there's a shitload of animals getting killed on the roads every year. 350 million vertebrates in the US, just over 200 million in Europe, 10 million in Australia. They're the places that we have some sort of information about. Almost certainly, these are underestimates. And there's plenty of examples where roadkill is a threat to rare and endangered species, like a direct threat. And I think there's been some studies to suggest that roadkill is probably the greatest anthropomorphic cause of wildlife mortality in the world. Unfortunately though, or well, whatever it is, it's the fact, fencing and wildlife crossing structures, they're not a panacea to wildlife vehicle collisions. We can't build fences and crossing structures everywhere. The vast length of the problem, as in the length of the road and rail network, is massive. They're expensive to build, expensive to install. We need to clear vegetation in order to build the fences. If you've got steep topography or floods and sand and snow, that can damage fences. And for some species, they don't even realise there's a fence. So for species that fly high or glide across gaps, these species don't even see that there's a fence. So the question is, can technology provide the solution? And by technology, I'm really referring to systems that detect wildlife and or the vehicles and or alerts the driver or the animals to basically be careful, the car is about to hit an animal, watch out, slow down, avoid the collision, etc. And the different types of technical solutions can either target the animals, they can target the vehicle operator, or they can target both. Also want to point out that a vehicle operator, it includes the person holding a steering wheel, but it also includes the computer system that will be driving autonomous vehicles in the not too distant future. So vehicle operator can be the person or it can be the computer. So traditional, we've been, I guess, playing with technological solutions for a while. Signs. And we've had these sort of technologies, I guess, that you can either stick to the front of your car or put on the side of the road or the railway. They kind of do this magic noise thing, and supposedly animals will stop getting killed. Unfortunately, there's very little evidence. In fact, most of the evidence suggests that none of these systems work particularly well up until this point. So we ran a symposium back in May for Transport for New South Wales, a state government in Australia, where we tried to tackle, well, it was in response to an election commitment to spend $500,000 on one of these technologies, and we kind of said, well, maybe there's a better way to spend your money. So we ran this symposium, looked at all the different kinds of technological solutions, and then gave some advice and direction to this government agency on how to spend their money in terms of trials and testing and development. And along with a bunch of people at the symposium, too many to mention, but we got together the day after and we tried to sort of workshop everything we'd learnt the previous day to try and, I guess when I started this project, it was this kind of amorphous mass of all these kind of ideas and technologies and very confusing words of AI and machine learning and animal detection and blah, blah, blah. quite confusing. So we've kind of tried to distill it down into a number of principles and steps to try and help us understand. So the physical approach, crossing structures and fencing that target wildlife, and we've also got targeting the vehicle operator, things like traffic calming and speed reduction. So that's going to reduce traffic volume, reduce traffic speed, and hopefully reduce the number of collisions. Then there's signal-based approaches, and I'll explain what I mean by signals in a minute. But basically, again, it targets either wildlife or the vehicle operator, and they're things like things on the side of the road or the railway, which we've called wayside deterrents. So they're reflectors or repellents to try and keep the animals off the road. Or they can be things stuck to the front of the vehicle that send out a noise as we drive along. Then there's things that target the vehicle operator. So just basic things like signage is a technology because there is a signal involved, which I'll explain. There's in-car or in-vehicle systems like a GPS that could alert you where you are. And then there's pre-vehicle signals, which are things like education and awareness. And then there's signal-based approaches with detection systems. And so these detection systems can either detect animals or detect the vehicles. And again, they can detect wildlife, they can aim to influence wildlife or aim to influence the vehicle operators. And I'll go into some of those in a moment. First and foremost, though, we need to understand that all of these technological solutions, there's this thing called signalling theory that's going on. There is a receiver of the signal. Well, first of all, there's a signal. Then there's something or someone that sends the signal. And then there is a receiver of the signal. For that to happen, we need some hardware, we probably need some software, and we need that signal. So the hardware might be doing the animal detecting, the software is interpreting data from the detection system, and the signal is what goes between the hardware, if you like, and the vehicle operator. So in the first example, I'll go back one. Signals, they have to be biologically relevant. We often think of this from an animal perspective, but when I see a sign on the road that says kangaroos for the next 420 kilometres, that's meaningless. After 418 kilometres, I forgot that I saw a sign 6 hours ago. So that's also, when I talk about biologically relevant, it's also for people. It has to be reliable. So how many times have we seen a sign and it's been there for 100 years, whatever. In fact, it is almost 100 years since we started doing signage, and I have never seen an animal there. It's bullshit. There is no problem at that location with that sign, is what I'm thinking as a motorist, because I've seen the sign and I haven't seen an animal there ever. So I'm just going to ignore it. We need to hear it or receive it. So if there's an animal deterrent system, they actually need to hear or see the signal above all the confusion and the noise of the road. I also need to know how to respond. There was a classic study that was done about in the 1970s where they put a taxidermied animal, a big deer on the side of the road to measure motorist responses. Cars were having collisions because they just freaked out thinking there was an animal they were about to hit. So people need to know what to do when they see these signs. Habituation's an issue, and we also need sufficient time to respond. So if the animal only hears the noise 1 second before the car gets there, it's got no chance to get off the road. And systems will vary in complexity. So the most simple one is on the top there. There is a sign. The signal is the visual. It goes to the driver of the car, and there is a message there to slow down or be more cautious. It can get a little more complicated when the vehicle is the centre of the signal and the wildlife are receiving it. And it can get even more complex as we go along. A couple of things to think about as how we kind of assess how these things work and how effective they are. There's this thing called the technology readiness level. It's a bit jargony. It's produced by NASA in the 70s, but it's been adopted around the world and been modified to some degree, but it's still pretty consistently adopted. And it's a linear system, or it implies a linear approach. So the technology readiness level 1 is at the bottom. We've kind of got a basic idea of what's going on. But technology readiness level number 9 indicates that that technology is ready to be deployed, it's fully tested, we know exactly how effective it is, and it's good to go. So if you buy that technology or that system, I guess if you're flying to the moon, you want to know that it's actually going to work. And technology readiness level 9 indicates that that's the case. What's really important though is that each step along the way with these technology sort of systems and components of systems is we know we can pull out any component of a system no matter where on this scale it is, and we should be able to say this is really effective, or this is 50% effective, or it was a complete failure. We don't want to get to readiness level 9 and assess it for the first time. We need to assess it as we go along. So we've come up with this kind of schema, if you like, that kind of, I think, will help as we progress forward with addressing all these kinds of technologies and thinking about them and designing them. So, do we understand the biology and behaviour of the animal? We then go into the lab or whatever and we start thinking about it and jotting down some ideas. We'll do some technology design. That's also in the lab, maybe on the side of the road perhaps. We then do some prototype testing. This is just small-scale prototypes. If that works, we go into the field and we test it properly. And if any of those stages don't work, we can go back and repeat the step, try something different. And it's important that as perhaps end users, if we're going to buy some tech, we want to see how successful your technology has been at each of these points along the way. So we don't get to the end, which has happened previously. I'm thinking of things like reflectors and other kind of acoustic deterrents, certainly those we have in Australia. They're marketed as a proven product, but we cannot get any data to show any of these earlier steps. And of course, when we try them in the field, consistently, there is no evidence that they result in a significant reduction in wildlife vehicle collisions. So, a few examples. We've got standard signs, slightly smarter signs, and yes, tree kangaroos are a thing. They do live in trees. And we've got smarter signs again, but still fairly useless. But I think one of the ways forward, a big part of the future will be intelligent signs. So these are signs that only turn on and only function when animals are detected. There are wayside or vehicle-mounted animal deterrents. So these are the ones I'm talking about in Australia. There's no evidence, or very little evidence, that they work. At best, it might reduce it by a few percent, the rate of reduction of wildlife vehicle collisions. Some more recent trials using wayside deterrents on train lines has shown some good results. These use natural wildlife calls, and there is some evidence that that's effective. I think when we get car companies jumping on board and getting involved in this technology, that says something about the future. So Volkswagen have got this thing called rough badge. It's currently being developed in Australia for kangaroos, but they say that it's potentially got value for European and North American deer. But it uses naturally occurring sounds, so predator calls, alarm calls, and foot thumps. So kangaroos will whack their feet on the ground as a warning if there's danger nearby. The testing is being done in stages, similar to what I showed you on that previous slide, and trials are currently underway, so we don't have any results. Importantly though, I think there's going to be some confidentiality issues with this because it's a significant market investment by Volkswagen. And if it works, it's going to be pretty amazing. We got simple in-car warnings. So this is where, we should be able to do this right away. We know where many animals are getting killed. We know where there's natural areas. So as you drive along, your in-car sat-nav, your satellite navigation system, the GPS on your phone, should be able to warn you that you're going into a high-risk area at a high-risk time of day. So it doesn't beep at you at midday. It only beeps between 6 and 8 o'clock at night and maybe 5 and 7 in the morning when the wildlife are active. But the same risks associated with standard signs apply to here. If we never see animals on the roadside, when we get these warnings, then the same things apply. We're going to ignore them. But if we can combine that with animal detection systems, so this is where it gets a bit complicated. There are signals being sent from the animal detection system, which could be on the car or it could be on the side of the road. It goes to the operator or to a sign. And hopefully we know how to respond. And yes, we do have koalas in Australia that are about 6 feet tall. That one on the right, it looks rather large in the windscreen. So I think a large koala like that would cause anyone to slow down. So the animal detection systems, there's a whole range of things being trialled. We've got break-the-beam sensors, so as an animal crosses that beam, it gets triggered. We've got optical cameras, thermal cameras, they can be mounted to vehicles, mounted to the side of roads. We've got seismic sensors, so looking for the footprints, the footfalls of animals. It's particularly good if you're working on elephants, not so good for other species. And acoustic as well. So if animals are making a characteristic call, that also has potential. And then there's LiDAR, so light detection and ranging. And that's very quick, very expensive at the moment still, but very accurate. It can detect very small shapes and sizes. So all these kind of systems are available to be tested and developed to use in animal detection systems. But what's important is those detection systems only detect or collect data. They're just collecting images, if you like. We need to convert that data to useful information. And that's where artificial intelligence and machine learning comes in to rapidly and accurately convert that data to information that informs a signal for operators of vehicles or for animals to respond to. So this example is just birds leaving a roost, and they've used weather radar to try and classify and convert that data of birds leaving the roost to information. And they're basically, those dark blue columns, the 5 of them, are just different algorithms that we use to analyse that data. All I'm saying there is that different algorithms are suited for different things and will give you different information. And we've got challenges. So how do we make some of these things work for erratically hopping marsupials? So Volvo, a few years ago now, were trying to test and develop this stuff. They gave up on Australia, as many people have done, just saying. But I think one of the key things here is that once this equipment is attached to vehicles, the detection system and the warning system goes with the car wherever it is. We're not relying just on a fence on a motorway. It should also work on some of those secondary roads, often where the collision rates are higher than the bigger roads. And the equipment, so OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, they're already on this as well. In 2023, and that circle shows, I don't know if you can see it, I think this was Volkswagen as well. In their in-car apps, they've got warnings that says animal or person on road, and in this case it's about animals. So they're already incorporating detection systems and warning systems in their vehicles from last year. And they've mapped out the next few years to sort of further implement these changes and these upgrades. So are we ready for this brave new world? Computer power will double every 2 years. It has been up until now at least. So if we think we've got constraints now with how quickly we can do the machine learning and artificial intelligence, that's only going to get quicker and smarter and faster. There will be mistakes, there will be teething issues. We still have to think about the trigger for the signal. Is it reliable? What happens if we've got false negatives and false positives? Is the sending and receiving of the signals reliable? Do animals and vehicle operators respond in the way we want them to? Are we ready for a connected environment, connected driving environment? This graph here just shows the number of connected cars already on the road. So in 2025, assuming that's now, say, there's about 400 million cars that are connected. And by connectivity, I mean they're reporting back to wherever, I'm not sure where it's going back to, but they're collecting data as they drive along and they're reporting that data. So yeah, that's just the United States, EU, China and Japan. And the number of connected cars is going to increase. If you're driving a Tesla, you're probably part of this connected family. Which species does it not work reliably for? if we embrace this technology future, we need to know where the limits are. We can't just assume that it's going to work for all species at all times. To do that, we need to collaborate. So I've heard already at this conference and previously, we're really good at bringing together engineers and the ecologists. Are we ready to embrace the technology people, the people who know how to analyse data? What about the car and equipment manufacturers? They should be here as well, the technology companies. Open access, data sharing and sharing of code is quite common in the sort of computing world, in some parts of the computing world, those sort of altruistic people who want to see the world a better place. But there's also a financial incentive and there's confidentiality things, because companies that can make this work first are going to make the most money. And we need to engage now rather than in 10 years to make sure that the tech that gets developed is actually effective. It has to function across the planet, across countries in Europe, around the world. The question I've got as well is, that's okay for people who are early adopters and buy these new e-cars and so on, but for older people, or people who, age is irrelevant rather, people who don't have enough money or who don't want to buy a new car, how do we get this technology to work on our older stock of vehicles? So where do we focus? We need wildlife deterrents that are meaningful. We need to be testing and developing the animal detection systems. We need those artificial intelligence, machine learning tools and algorithms. We need social scientists and community and communications and engagement people to teach us how to respond. The connected world is happening, cooperative intelligent transport systems. When one car sees something, it can tell another car and report back to some sort of head office, if you like, or database. How do we feel about that? Do I really want someone to know where I'm driving and what I've seen? There's some issues about that. Eventually, and it's not that far away, these triggers, these signals will be automatically telling your car what to do. Won't that be fun? Okay. We need to assess effectiveness and we need to collaborate. I've been pretty high level in my presentation today, but I'm really excited to just point these out. So these are another 4 sessions across the next couple of days that have presentations on specific parts of technology. So do go along to those and check them out. And that is all. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Nope, it was working again.
Yeah, but it's just, we have time for a couple of questions if you have. Okay, there I see.
Andreas. Oh.
There was one for me. No? Okay. Well, then thank you very much, Rod. That was really, really entertaining and very good.
Entertaining, excellent.
Yes, entertaining as well, of course. You're always entertaining.
I did that.
But let me ask you a question. I very much liked your flow chart, where coming from the understanding of the biological behavior of the species into the implementation. But what we often see, as you said, is that we're starting at the other end. We're starting with the technical implementation, the ready product, and fail to look at if it's really biologically effective, what kind of implementation or solutions we would actually need, and how we can improve them. And this is something that is probably also rooted in how administrations work. They have money to buy stuff and install stuff, and then they don't monitor, so they don't know if it's working or not. They don't fund the basic research that is needed, and they don't have money to do some field trials. So what is your advice? How could we change that? How could we become more effective?
Next question. Okay, it's a really good question, and it's frustrating Because how many times, have we, we've seen this situation happen so many. I don't have an answer, unfortunately. Maybe there's people who lead transport agencies that we can, or lead the environmental part of transport agencies to think about an answer to that. Because I don't know. I guess all we can do is keep pointing out that what they're proposing is rubbish. Don't install that. We know it doesn't work. But I think people want this stuff to work. We really, really, really want these solutions because they're cheap. We can roll them out everywhere, relatively cheap. And it makes me feel good because we're doing something. Sorry, it's an unsatisfactory answer.
Thank you.
Marguerite at the back after. Eric.
Thank you already for your presentation. I just want to ask you, the main problem is detection, and as soon as possible. And when vegetation is high, close to the road, I don't think the detectors are able to detect as soon as it could be for vehicle. And you could provoke accident. And the other question is, but I think Andres has asked it, is how you will evaluate your success in applying your system, because you don't have counts of mortality and you don't have any official knowledge of what happens in present time. So,
yeah, good question. So I think depending on where you are on that development time frame, there's different things. I guess the ultimate thing, if I got your question right, Eric, is there a reduction in the number or severity of, it's not just the number, it's also the severity. So if we hit a deer at 100 kilometres an hour, that can be fatal. If we hit a deer at 40 kilometres an hour, the car's damaged, but we'll probably walk out of the vehicle. So severity matters, but at each of those stages in the development timeline, we might be interested in measuring different things. So when an animal hears a signal, how long does it take for it to move away? What's the response of vehicle operators when they see a sign, and how quickly do they respond? If it takes them 12 seconds to respond, and then the response is a slight slowing down, then that's not quick enough potentially to actually have an effect on the rate of collision. So I guess there's different things we might want to measure at different stages in order to inform the likely effectiveness of that particular solution at the end. And I'll be completely frank, I don't think, in fact I know technology is not going to solve all the problems, but it's going to be another tool in our toolbox that we can use. And we need to know where it's effective, where it's not effective, and what that effectiveness is. Anyone who says this, and I probably said it in my presentation, but if anyone says this technology does not work, that's not good enough. We want to know, does it reduce collision rates by 5%, 20%, 50%? Under what conditions? That way, when a planner is making a decision about where to build a road or how fast the speed should be, they can say, okay, I can install an animal deterrent on the side of the road. It reduces collisions by 20%. It's going to cost me $50,000. Am I happy with a 20% reduction for $50,000? Or do I need to spend $5 million to build a fence that achieves a 95% reduction in collisions? Something to think about. Don't know if that answered the question, but...
Rodney, I hope you're not going to say next question after I ask my question. So a lot of this technology sounds extremely promising. Yeah. But when we're equipping cars, my question is, how much more energy are we going to be needing? And will we eventually be maybe decreasing collisions, but taking up habitat for the production of that energy? Has that side of the story been looked at?
Next question? No. I would say no. We're not even thinking about what's required from an energy perspective to build something. But then I guess the trade-off is to install a fence, we might need to clear 5 metre strip of vegetation on both sides of the road to build that fence. And if it's 10 kilometres, you do the maths about how much habitat loss that relates to. So I guess it's just knowing the details of all the different aspects so we can make properly informed decisions.
So I think I'm the next one. Hello, Rod. It's in here. Yeah, so I'd say thanks a lot for all this great presentation as usual. But it's also nice to see the perspective from Australia, and also thanks a lot. So it's actually so your practices and all the refer was roads and vehicles, manufacturers and all. It requires sometimes a big investment or big awareness and all also to what is next for the road transport. But it's also from as I'm coming from the railway sector, so what do you think that is what stops the railway sector? What I'm seeing is that we can actually, as a big, that we can buy the rolling stocks, that we can implement it at the procurement strategies and all. So what do you see what stops the railway sector to implement such practices?
Sorry, what do I see is I missed the question.
Yeah, why this has not been implementing such practices in the railway sector?
Yeah, okay. I think we're at a point in time, it's a bit like the previous presentation, we're at a crossroads. We're at a time when the technology, the computing power has caught up with these ideas that we've had for 20 years, and we're starting to see them being able to be implemented. I think in the next couple of years we are going to see a lot more equipment manufacturers getting in and saying, I've got a solution. So I think it's just the timing, but I also think the railway sector is much more rules-based, if you like, or strictly rules-based compared to roads. Just done a few projects in Australia with the railways, and they've got very strict rules about the setback distances and what we can do and can't do. So I wonder if that's partly a limitation. There's the sort of rules, the standards that the railways people have used for the past 100 years, or the past 5 years, whatever it might be. And I think it's just now a matter of time that the thing that's kind of held us back is the joining, if you like, of the technology, the computer power, and I guess the equipment manufacturers getting involved and coming up with these solutions, or potential solutions.
We don't have time for more questions. I'm sorry, we can discuss it later. Actually, now we have the coffee break in the building of the faculty. My colleague Tomasz is going to tell you some other important things. So, thank you very much.